All right, it appears to be recording. Yes, it is recording. All right. So hello, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Moderately Tipsy History, which wound up being more tipsy than I planned. This has been a very interesting day. So anyway, we're going to talk today about the false Dmitry problem that Russia had at in the 16th and 17th century. Okay, so let's start by talking about Ivan IV, who is more broadly known in the West as Ivan the Terrible. He wasn't so terrible. Well, he was kind of terrible, but that's not why he got the name. We could talk about that another time. So anyway, you got Ivan the Terrible, and Ivan the Terrible had 3 sons. I'm not even sure about how many daughters he had because no one really cared about daughters back then, and it's not even recorded really, but he had 3 sons. One of those sons, however, his eldest son, who was also an Ivan, there you go. He accidentally murdered in 1581. I guess you don't accidentally murder someone, but he killed his son in a fit of rage in 1581. So there goes his firstborn son. So now he only has 2 sons. He has Fyodor and Dmitry, who are 25 years apart. So in 1584, Ivan the Terrible dies, and Fyodor becomes Tsar. And Fyodor surrounds himself with a bunch of very scheming boyars. Boyars are like the Russian nobility. And one of those boyars' names is Boris Godunov. And in the summer of 1584, Boris Godunov, under the influence of Boris Godunov, Fyodor exiles Ivan the Terrible's seventh wife. It was his 7th wife and his son Dmitry. They're banished to a city called Uglich. It's fun because it sort of looks like the word ugly, but it's Uglich. And at the time, Dmitry was just a child. I think he was 5 years old. They lived there for a few years. They're very popular because when you are the son of a former czar, you tend to be very popular. And so, but in May of 1591, Dmitry dies in Uglich under very mysterious circumstances. Everyone agrees that his throat was slit, but what they don't agree on is what happened. Some people say that on the orders of Boris Godunov, someone went to Uglich and murdered him. Other people say he was known to have epilepsy, and other people say that he accidentally stabbed himself while having a seizure. So anyway, Dmitry's dead, and so the last living son of Ivan the Terrible, Fyodor, is Tsar. He is Fyodor I. And then in 1598, Fyodor dies with no children and not even a girl. And some rumors say that this was Dmitry's curse, that Fyodor had hired someone to go and, kill Dmitry. And so Dmitry was never allowed to have any sons, and he died early, and he had no one left on the throne. So in the absence of anyone on the throne, this boyar who he hung out with, Boris Godunov, he takes the throne, and he takes the throne at a time that just really kind of sucks to be Tsar of Russia. And I'm going to, here we go. Here's my, so this is Boris Godunov. There was a big opera about it. And so this is a very famous Russian opera singer, Fyodor Shchelyapin, as Boris Godunov. So anyway, he was Tsar at a really shitty time. Among other things that were happening, there was a famine. A really bad famine. Probably close to 100,000 people in Russia died of hunger or starvation. And also, boyars and nobles are scheming all the time. And Boris was one of them, and there were a bunch of nobles scheming against him. And so what happens is, one day out of nowhere, there's this guy who shows up in Poland, of all places. He comes into Poland, and he says, you know what? I'm Dmitry. Dmitry didn't really die in 1591. That was some other kid who was murdered. My mom snuck me off because they know where they were coming to kill me, and I am Dmitry. Now, the people in Poland were always fighting with Russia, and the Poles said, I don't know if this guy's story's true or not, but you know what? It makes a good, it'll help us make inroads into taking over Russia. So the Poles back this Dmitry, and then there is war. There's war between Russia and there's war between Poland, and they're fighting. And then a bunch of Cossacks join up the cause. And there's an awful lot of fighting. They're fighting just outside of Moscow. When in 1605, Boris Godunov just up and dies. He does have a son, and so in theory, his son becomes czar. But within like less than a month, the forces that are backing this Dmitry that just popped up out of nowhere now go and fight and take over Moscow. And they were really, really mean when they took over Moscow. They basically killed all the Godunovs, and whoever they didn't kill, they raped. So that was fun times for all the Godunovs all around. And one of the nobles, because nobles are always scheming, who backed this false Dmitry was a guy named Vasily Shchuisky. It's a fun name to say too. Vasily Shchuisky. So with the backing of Vasily Shchuisky, this Dmitry, who if you ever look at the, the Tsar lines in a textbook is actually referred to as false Dmitry, is officially the Tsar of Russia for 10 months. Then one day, and it's because boyars are always scheming, Vasily changes his mind, decides he doesn't like this Dmitry on the throne anymore. And so in May of that year, Dmitry marries a Polish woman and doesn't insist that she convert to Orthodox Christianity. Instead, she remains a Catholic. And in Russia at that time, not converting to Russian Orthodox and remaining a Catholic does not fly. It is not a popular thing. And so within days of the marriage, Vasily Shchuisky raises an army against Dmitry, and they kill him. They kill him rather gruesomely. They lay his body out in the square where people go and abuse the body. Then they cremate the body, and I think I promised someone that there would be human cannons. They cremate the body, take all the ashes, put it in a cannon, and fire it to Poland because they thought that he was a Polish pretender trying to bring Catholicism to Russia. And so that is how Russia had an actual czar named False Dmitry on the throne. But there's more, because in July of 1607, another guy shows up and says he's Dmitry. Again, backed by the Polish army, he is presented to the Polish bride that the other Dmitry had just married. And she says, of course he's my Dmitry. This is totally my husband. And so again, backed by a Polish army, another false Dmitry attempts to take the throne. Meanwhile, boyars are constantly scheming, and they decide they don't like Vasily Shchuisky, who is now the Tsar anymore, and he gets dethroned. So right now there is no Tsar in Moscow, backed by a Polish army. The second false Dmitry looks like he may become the Tsar. So he's just outside of Moscow when, in December of 1610, he is beheaded while in a drunken stupor by one of his own men. He wasn't even killed by any boyar scheming or anything like that. He had flogged one of his own men, and that guy just decided he didn't like this guy anymore and he was going to kill him. So for a time, there were almost not one, but two false Dmitrys on the throne of Russia. And so anyway, after that happened, there was some Polish prince who was czar for a little bit, but then he tried to convert all of Russians to Catholicism, and that did not fly. And so there was basically nothing but chaos for several years within Russia. No czar, no real recognized czar, no real authority, nothing at all. At some point, the Swedes got involved. And the Swedes were so pissed at the Poles who had invaded Russia that they actually found themselves a third false Dmitry to claim the throne. That guy didn't really stand out too much. You don't hear a whole lot about him, but there were in fact three false Dmitrys who all tried to be czar, one of whom actually succeeded. And then, so for a few years, we have a kind of stateless Russia. And then in February of 1613, all the nobles, they formed this thing called the Zemsky Sobor. It's kind of like the House of Nobles in England, where it's like the nobles and they can do things and they can vote, but they just don't really have much authority. And so in 1613, the Zemsky Sobor votes for Michael Romanov to come to the throne. And then the Romanovs get to be czars for more or less. Catherine the Great was not actually a Romanov, but anyway, they get to be czars pretty much until 1917. So anyway, that is how Russia wound up with three false Dmitrys They constantly had a pretender problem to the throne of constantly dead people showing up saying that they were the rightful heirs to the Russian throne until 1613. And so that whole era of Russia where you had false Dmitries and boyars becoming czars is called the time of troubles. In Russian, I think it's smutnaya vremya. So it's troubled times or time of troubles. So anyway, that's my story. I'm happy to take any questions, although I don't know if I can answer any of them. But that's it. Oh, Joyce said to drink more and try to say that. So anyway, you guys can unmute yourselves. I'll stop the recording now.